Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Perfect Balance Stride Class, place where conscious and like-minded individuals are guided towards the full development of their potential through collective reasoning. We have with us today Brother Okavango, the Rebel Guru, Brother Yaga, Brother Bingi, and we have a very special guest to the Stride Class today, Brother Clifton Ellis. Brother Ellis is a longtime friend and our consultant in Africa and Russian affairs, and an expert in renewable energy. A very rounded individual, I would say. He is a close friend of the family as well. And welcome, Brother Clifton. It's great to have you here with us today.
Blessings, brothers. Blessings. I'm very honored to be here this morning and to have what will be an no doubt enlightened conversation about many of the topics that are very relevant to our interests. So looking forward to just giving my 2 cents and to learn and contribute on all of these topics.
Give thanks.
Give thanks.
Yes, how they are them?
They are give thanks. Another day.
Yes, sir, which is right.
Turning in our favor.
Yeah, man.
Which
is right.
Yeah, man, don't give thanks, man. We're there, and don't forget to mention that Brother Clifton is also a geopolitical analyst and some of the issues that we will be talking about today. So his voice in the conversation is necessary because he understands the issues really well.
And don't leave out Pan-Africanists.
Yeah, man, that's true. That's the one in the Pan-Africanism.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, man.
Yes, sir. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so that whenever a video is uploaded, you're notified immediately as to its upload, and you're able to view the video and see the content. Today, we want to have a discussion on Africa, its geopolitical positioning today, the influence of BRICS on the development of Africa, and we want to also talk on the use of renewable energy towards creating a more energy stable Africa, where everyone in Africa is able to have access to consistent and stable energy. Clifton, as a person who is traveling multiple places in the world, going around taking care of your responsibilities, and a person who has traveled vast parts of Africa, on a geopolitical point, on a geopolitical stand, from that front, how do you view Africa today from that geopolitical viewpoint?
Thank you, Ras Dada. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this subject because it's been a passion of mine since, I'd say, around 2018, 2019, when I had a sudden download at the time when a friend of mine who was a surgeon from Botswana called and asked if I could assist, with, helping his family who had a farm to create a little microgrid system so that they would be, connected off the grid when energy was not available from the grid. And even though that was not really my expertise at the time, I decided to do an investigation into how I could assist with the problem. And so at the time, I took a trip to Jamaica, and I was, of course, spending time on Doctor's Cave Beach, but meditating on the issue, on the topic. And I just had like a vision at that moment in time that I had to take a deeper look, not just on the issue of microgrids, but, given my expertise in understanding the electrical infrastructure, whether it's generation technology or the distribution system or the transmission system and the overall infrastructure and how it was interconnected and how it operated, And, so I took a deeper look, a deeper dive into the subject, where I started to read reports, McKinsey reports from the CIA and the other African Development Bank, just to understand some of the vision from the, very, the supranational entities and what, their perspective were on Africa, because I didn't really have any kind of information at the time on the subject to the level that I desire. And when I read one report, I believe this was a McKinsey report, and it stipulated in that report at the time that in sub-Saharan Africa, you had a population of 920 million people. And of that 920 million people, there were approximately 2/3 of them, that was 630 million, that did not have access to electrical energy. And at the time, I found this to be pretty shocking, because if you understand anything about macroeconomics, you understand that energy is really the lifeblood of any economy. If you increase the energy infrastructure by a certain percentage, you'd expect a similar percentage increase in productivity, because it is really the as they say, the electrons flowing through the wire that allow for machine technology and automation to be created, and that of course increase productivity. And so if you are moving to create a competitive economy, you could not do so without having a strong electrical and energy infrastructure. And so I thought, okay, Africa is in dire straits. It needs all the assistance it can get. And therefore, even though I don't have, all the relevant contacts or access, I would try a thing. And at the time, I envisioned an organization called at the time ICO, which is the International Sustainable Energy Organization, and with a viewpoint that we would bring together close friends of mine. So so some close friends of mine, just in the same format here, where you have like-minded people coming together to discuss a topic. It was formed. The conception of it, at least in its inception, among these friends of mine, myself. So Tomek, he's himself an electrical engineer and project manager. There was a Pascal, who was an entrepreneur in Paris. There was Xavier, who was a surgeon and gynecologist from Botswana, and Ernest, a professor at the university in Cardiff. And so we all came together, and we decided to collectively form this organization, and we would try to implement the vision that I had to create a conversation, a discussion, and to engage with the various institutions, starting with Botswana, and to see how it is that we could collaborate to create a forum that we would then be able to assist with the development of a strategy that would incorporate people from the grassroots. Because what I had observed was that you had the IMF, you had the World Bank, that would negotiate, or African countries, or our countries, period, would go to these banks in order to get capital, in order to invest in large scale infrastructural projects. And there was a significant amount of politics and red tape around anything to do with energy infrastructure in general, and of course the terms that would be given to the African countries, by these international banks and credit institutions. They were very much unfavorable. And I started to look at some of the numbers, recognizing that if you took a loan from the IMF, and of course you had to go through and you'd have to accept certain terms. The terms, of course, would result in an erosion of sovereignty of the state, because generally speaking, these institutions controlled, by Western powers, do not just give credit like that. It comes typically with political and which can be quite invasive within each sovereign state, so to speak. So they would say, well, you have to open up your market and allow certain produce to enter your market, or it came with conditions that
It's
were,
an unfair trade. It's an
yeah,
unfair trade.
exactly. It is an unfair trade. So when I recognized these practices, these are malpractices, I mean, I was even more motivated, understanding, that exploitation is in different ways. There is exploitation through the financial, area. There is exploitation in geopolitical areas. There is exploitation via trade, and as my brother said, unfair trade. And as a consequence of this, I recognize that Africa was in a dire strait. It could not continue with the same methodology and expect itself to start to develop and therefore start to alleviate poverty. So I recognized that it was important for people to take individuals and individuals in collective groups like such as this one around this discussion table, to take it at heart and to do whatever they could do as individuals and as a small collective to enact change and positive change. So we had a trip. So we registered the organization back in 2018. We successfully made it, registered with the UK. It was the charity and board. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but they're the regulators and they are the gatekeepers. And of course, we had a lot of challenges registering the organization. We had to get a lawyer and to fight our cause, but finally we managed to do it, and we made our first trip to Botswana, where we met with the Ministry of Energy. We met with a solar energy company, the CEO. We met with 2 universities and with another institution, and we were trying to see how it is that we could create collaboration and discussion around, because it is through this kind of dialogue that ideas are formed and consolidated, because there is enough minds around the table to see where everything intersects, and where everything intersects is really the kernel or the seed that now can be planted, and then hopefully something can grow, and then the fruit will be born from that. So that was the start of something that I didn't really understand where it was going, because I was simply moving from my own at least inspiration, right? And luckily I had supportive friends who bought into the vision and that sort of something. In the process of that, I was seen by a Russian institution, a Russian Mozambican institution called Afrique. And then I was approached and said, okay, fine. They believe that I had something to offer, and therefore an invitation was made for me to travel to the Congo in December of 2000 and Kinshasa 2018, and I would be a member of an international election observer, because it was the first election that was taking place in the Congo, I think, in 30 years. And it was the entire world was on this election, and so everybody made note that the Russians were there, because of course it was backed also by Russian funds, not just by Mozambican funds, but it was a collaboration between Russia and Mozambique. Anyway, we went there, we observed the mission, and that was where my heart ached to see the level of poverty in the Congo. I could not really understand how a country that is so rich in
everything.
Raw material could have such degree of poverty. I was shocked, and I remember flying back to the UK, and I remember just being very annoyed and agitated, and I had so many emotions at the same time, and I immediately lost interest in my line of work. At the time, I was working for Ørsted. They're the largest developer of offshore wind in the world, and I had a really good position there as being one of the lead engineers on what would be the largest wind farm in the world, which is the Hornsea 2 project. And so I was managing the contract between that project and the electrical grid, which is a highly strategic role, as well as helping with the overall design of the actual system and undertaking a lot of the feasibility analysis that would influence the design. So I was in a very good position, at least so some would say, but I lost interest overnight. I did not really believe in it anymore, because when you see such exploitation at that level, you kind of recognize that you're in a bubble, and that bubble doesn't really represent, the actual realities of what is happening. And so I felt, okay, fine, it's a call to arms as far as I'm concerned, to try my best as an individual to do something about the issue. So I expressed a lot of my this kind of feelings, to what was a Russian colleague of mine who was a member of the contingency, who then said to me, well, you have something to offer, so we would like to invite you to join our organization. We understand they cannot pay me as much or whatever the situation is, but they will have something, and hopefully it will allow me to express my passion and simultaneously work on my plans for my own organization. So I decided to submit my resignation, and then I moved to South Africa, Johannesburg, which was March of 2019. And then that was where my own education of Africa, I would say, really began. Because yes, you can go.
All right, Clifton. Before
Sorry.
you go into that, it's been a while.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. Could you tell us about, like, for the audience, like your like a early life, how you naturally progress from from your early life to now being on the continent doing this marvelous work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So as Ras Dada mentioned, we're childhood friends.
Mhm.
All of we grew up at Farmites, Jamaica, 7th Street, 8th Street. And it was, I grew up in we were fortunate to live in Farmites. I would think, because Farmites now seem to be like a good area. That's true. I mean, you go to Farmites these days, and every house built up. I mean, our house remained more or less the same, the one room, for a very long time. So I mean, it was, but I had grace upon my life, and I was able to come through and go to Montego. I went to Anchovy, and then from there I went to Montego Bay Community College. I did well within the pre-engineering course. Went to UTech. It was a year after my first year in UTech, that opportunity came for me to travel to the UK. And so, I traveled to the UK, not originally with the idea of staying to study, but we Jamaicans are chances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Master, so boy,
Yes, to return.
Master. So, I mean, I just chanced it, I'd say divine intervention. God was by my side. And so in the process, I just made an application, after arriving in Bristol. Well, when I was in London, I took a job, milk sales, door to door, trying to sell milk, contracts for delivery. I mean, that's also when everybody I tell you in the morning, when you knock on them door, go move you this and go move you that, because
Mm-hmm.
you recognize how
Early in the
difficult it
morning.
is. So you recognize, boy, this life is, has challenges. If you're going to make things, and where you need an education, I thought, man, so this was where I recognized, I needed to, at least get an education, and at least as a platform to do anything, because I cannot handle this kind of life where you just, what I mean, I say. So I applied to university in Bristol. I mean, a few days later, I called the UTech, sent my transcript, was sent immediately. They took the transcript, and I think a few days later they called and said, okay, fine, we're offering you a place in the university here, but we never have the money still, and but my father, he had died, and there was a little smalls that I could use at least to register, and so I said, so I remember having an experience where I prayed to God. And then, I had an encounter with some people randomly in town. And then before long, I was in the Caribbean community. And next thing you know, I'm getting confirmation that this is something that I should do. So, I take the chance, and pack up my stuff and came back to the UK after, left, come back with the two suitcases. And so I was in the university and hustling all throughout, working and studying, all the way through, after which I finished undergrad. I was invited to do a PhD. In electrical engineering with a professor that identified me as somebody that he could work with. I started the PhD thesis in working on the generator, and the electrical system, how to model it in various softwares and do computational analysis on the systems and so forth and so on. But in the process, I didn't finish. I quit it, but I did manage to get a job in the field that required a PhD qualification at the time. So that was my in. So once I had work and studied and got through it and secured the job, and I said, I'm have to take a job here, against my professor's wishes, I went and I went rogue. I did my own thing because, I was broke, I was skint. It was time now to make some money, And so I was no longer interested in staying in university and studying. So anyhow, I started my career with one of the leading consultancies in the UK at the time, eConnect, and leading in the sense that when it comes to integrating all types of generation to the grid, that was, the actual, the company you wanted to work for, right? And so I had accelerated through the actual in this area to understand the niche of grid integration of all technology types and how to analyze and to build out the electrical infrastructure. So that really was really the start of where my understanding of this the electrical technology and all the rest of it. Sorry about that for the long-winded, but it's a long story. Yeah.
So the journey you've been on, Brother Clifton, is one that's very interesting, and I think it's very I don't want to use the word common to mean, as some people would think of it, as from a negative point of view, but it's not unique. A lot of people of African descent who have had to seek to relocate to different countries and you know just for a better life, right? This is something that we see over and over again, from people who are from the continent to people who are from the diaspora, right? And I believe that the geoeconomic political position of Africa and African diaspora countries is a direct influence to things such as this. Your journeys to Africa, have you come up with that understanding as well? And have you seen where this is something that we can change? And if so, how are we able to change?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of talented people. Some of them you will never hear their names because they've never been able to fulfill their potential or their destinies. And it's quite unfair, or it seems unfair, that there would be people, so many people, with so much talent that never would get the opportunity to demonstrate the talent and how to influence and affect, the world and their communities, the environment, all the rest of it. So yes, I mean the economic situation in the diaspora, the economic situation in Africa, I mean, it's rather dire, especially amongst the working class, the labor class, as we would say, where you don't really earn too much, to even sometimes pay your rent or even eat food. So this is really a big problem and something that I've observed absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the subject, because I really want to see talented African people have the opportunity to, at least get a chance to express and to have development of their own potential and bring it to a fruition. To fruition. So, for me, it's quite frustrating, when you can observe all of this talent, all of this potential, but yet there are forces at work, that are artificial. They're not natural forces, artificial forces, due to the structures, the frameworks of the actual system that prevents individuals from, achieving, their full potential.
Clifton, you spoke about renewable energy, right? What
Yeah.
are some of the projects that you have worked on in Africa? And what?
Okay, so when we went to Botswana, we had a plan. Our plan was to help with indigenous technologies, because we felt, okay, fine, if you are going to help yourself, you need to have your own industries. So at the BUIST, which is the Botswana University and Institute of Science and Technology, I can't remember the name of the area that it's at, but they were developing some pyrolysis technology. Pyrolysis is the process by which you use biological matter to convert it into diesel through a digestion process. So you create a digester, and then you effectively find what raw material you have naturally growing in abundance that could they call that feedstock, and then you'd feed it in, and you'll get a certain percentage of diesel, or what they call biofuels. It's really not diesel, but if you look at the the chemical constituency, it is more or less similar to the energy content of diesel as a hydrocarbon. And so we had a lot of discussions and an emphasis around that particular, and then we looked at what pilot project we could essentially create. But then, of course, it had to be the funding part of it. So we got to the funding part of it, where we were simultaneously, communicating with the university about this strategy of how it is that they could then create at least a production line for these kind of technology, therefore creating fuel and fueling. And that fuel could probably run like a mini generator, a diesel set of some kind, depending on, you'd have to do all the calculations in terms of how much feedstock you would need, and how many of these, pyrolysis machines you would need to create a certain the volume of diesel, and then what energy content in that volume of diesel then you would then be able to use to then run an electrical generator to then generate a certain amount of kilowatt and kilowatt hour, for example. So these are some of the things that we're envisioning to do, but then the funding part of it is the most important. So we came back to the UK and we thought, okay, fine, let's think about the funding part of it. There are some international funds that are available around the place that you could apply for if you had the project or the pilot project, and so forth and so on. However, a lot of these funds, you would need also private funds with it. Typically around 30 to 40% would need to be coming from the private sector. So they don't fund the entire project, they fund a portion of the project. And of course, a prerequisite for winning would be to demonstrate that you've secured also private funding. This was a problem for us. We recognized very soon in our plight that in order to secure funds, you need to get the right individuals, and finding the right individuals to fund a project. There are not many altruistic people out there, that would want to fund these projects to begin with. And then you start to recognize that getting capital is one of the hardest things that you could ever try to do, right? Securing capital, to even do anything. And this is where it is important, I believe, where African governments need to strategically look at, how much money they are making available for indigenous development of their own industries through the education system, through the university system, so forth and so on. Because if you were to look at how things have been done in the West, and of course we have to look at how they progress themselves, a lot of these ideas have come out of laboratories, whether it's Nikola Tesla's work or Edison's work. Absolutely. You need to have funding, and there needs to be a fund set aside specifically as a part of a budget that deals with these things specifically by the African government. But they need to have the vision, they need to have the people to drive these projects, because of course you understand a lot of this money can go to naught, and nothing can come of potentially will come of it. That is why you need a complete strategy, that you take all the right people from all the right sectors to put them in a room and to draft up a strategy. Well, first the vision and a strategy, and then you say, okay, fine, how much capital would be required in order to do this, and to plan, not just a 1-year thing or a 5-year thing, but you're doing it over the period of decades. And of course that is why it has to be depoliticized. You cannot have different administrations fighting against each other. Therefore, one come, one destroy the institution by not funding it, and then it's dead, and then the other one comes in afterwards and say, okay, we're gonna try a thing again and start from scratch again, which of course a lot of waste. Then, so you need an overall strategy where you understand the interconnectedness and the importance of developing your own indigenous technologies as a part of development, your own economic development, because no country can develop by importation only. You need something to sell to the market, and you need to give people work
be making something.
to be making something, and that is really how economies are really created. Look at China, for example. They went from farming to a manufacturing, or albeit they had preferential treatment with regards to the World Trade Organization, and of course there were some enemies of the I would say of the West, who decided to ship all the jobs there, which of course was a highly strategic failure as far as I'm concerned. If you really want to maintain your own economic power, you need manufacturing as a base. The idea of transitioning to a service-based economy is nonsense, because you're creating unskilled people. Skilled people are the ones that are going to develop the technology that will earn significant amount of return. Rather than the unskilled being a third party as a broker, as a case in London here. Of course, the banking institution is really why their economy is so high. But if you look at manufacturing, it's almost zilch. If you look at all of the what made England a great power, all of that has more or less been destroyed effectively. So, African governments need to understand the importance of investing in their own tech. And this was really a part of the vision that I had. But of course, when you're in these waters, you don't really know too many people and all the rest of it, and trying to get secure funding is very, very difficult.
The diktat has to come from policymakers and politicians who are making the big decision. Because as an NGO, there's so much you can do, especially if you don't have the power. And we've seen a lot of international institutions that have got their tentacles all over in Africa, all over the world. They restrict the development of nation building based on their idea of protectionism and protecting the people who drive this economy. What can African leaders do as a 52-state nation to increase their bargaining power and change the status quo as it presently is? Because there is nothing in favor of what Africans wants to do. And we've seen recently in the UN where they are trying to agree to give them 2 seats at the UN, but at the same time, they don't have any veto power. So this is nonsense as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, absolutely. What I would say, when I started to analyze the situation in Africa, I recognized that it is not that you don't have good African leaders, or you do not have good African leaders. We've had good African leaders, but the problem is with sabotage. Okay, we can mention people like Sékou Touré of Guinea, or Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Lumumba, of the Congo, and of course Gaddafi in recent years, that have had a vision and wanted to implement, the vision of uniting Africa. They being Pan-Africanist and building on the legacy of Marcus Garvey, that vision, the inception of which came from the Caribbean, from our island, Jamaica. We have to say that. So there were these leaders, but what happened? When the French, when Sékou Touré, came up against the French decided to leave and destroy everything that was created. Talk about, I don't even know the word to use, but spiteful. They destroyed everything, and then they left.
They are malicious set of people.
Very malicious, man. They poison the water, they poison the animals, they destroy the infrastructure. This is what I'm talking about. A leader comes up and says, you know what, we don't think that you are allowing us to implement our own policies. They say, well, we are your lords over you. Therefore, due to the supply chain and the interconnectedness of your economy with ours, and the fact that you're dependent on France and access to certain lines of credit through the French financial system. If you don't do and what we want you to do, then we're going to pack up and leave, and you are going to, and we're
Just
going to
get
destroy
out the
everything.
way.
And therefore, what happened to Guinea? Guinea went through a very difficult period subsequently. And you can imagine, this being used as an example for all other African leaders, that if you were to come and rise up as an independent individual trying to change the status quo in terms of the dependency or over dependency that is designed in the relationship between African countries, and the colonizers, this will be the consequence, right? So, when you recognize that, you need security. The first thing that Africa needs is really security. It needs to secure its own
Strong
border.
defense is very important.
Strong defense. If you have $1 million watch in your house and you don't have
Windows.
locks in your house, people are going to just kick in the door and come in and take it. You know what I'm saying? So the first thing you need is security. A vision of how you secure Africa in the sense. So, each state in Africa needs its own military intelligentsia. And unfortunately, you need all of that infrastructure. You cannot, therefore, you need to have allies who can provide you with that level of training in order so that you can have that level of, you can counteract, or counterintelligence in order to secure your border, not just from a military invasion, but from, the infiltration, right? And hybrid warfare, which is very, very real, right? Hybrid warfare is real. You go in there, you talk about NGOs, for example. Let me give you an example. So if you look in terms of NGOs, some of the biggest NGOs, whether they are the Red Cross, or the Gates and Melinda Gates, Bill Gates foundations and Clinton foundations, they have a lot of power, but they have a lot of funding. They have a lot of money. So, if you're an NGO, we can create an NGO right now to say, okay, fine, we're going to do some work in Africa. We can just, decide what we want to do in Africa, whether it's feeding people or education, whatever sector it is, health, whatever, awareness. Where's the money going to come from to fly us out to create the flyers, all the rest of it? It requires a lot of funding, to do these things. So if you don't have the funding as an NGO, right, if we were to want to do something like that, for example, you're not going to go very far. To talk to the right person, you need money in your pocket. People, unfortunately, you go to Africa right now, you want to meet somebody, he's gonna, before he introduces you to the right person, he's gonna tax you. He's gonna want to know where his cut is going to come from, what percentage of the deal he's going to get by simply making the introduction. And we don't know whether or not the introduction that he's going to make with the right person who has the right amount of clout and authority to take decisions so that things move. You don't know whether or not that person is actually going to be able to do what he says anyway, because there are a lot of used car salesmen that you will meet, such as the nature of the environment that we have in Africa. So we can't be idealistic. There is a lot of challenges that we have to deal with because we're dealing with human beings here. So the security part of it is important. That's the second from security, which of course you need an infrastructure. You need a philosophy that unites Africa and that philosophy has to include socioeconomics and finance.
So Clifton,
yeah,
you were mentioning manufacturing a while ago. We see where the West, North America, Europe has industrialized. We have seen the Eastern Asia industrialized, and now we are seeing the rise of Southern Asia, who's with India, who's industrialized, and we have seen Africa lag behind. Like you can say, all the countries in Africa are still lagging behind. What do you think is the main reason holding Africa back in that department, like manufacturing things? You said without manufacturing, you can't be like our economy. What is the main reasons holding Africa back? in that department?
A lack of finance,
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
or access to finance, a lack of integrated industrial policy, right, a lack of an overall strategy in term that incorporates the finance industrial policy in the long term. If you look at China, for example, they don't have to deal with the change of governments, right? So they can just plan for 50 years, right? And so they create their long-term strategy, and then they find the funds to fund it. And that they're not vulnerable to change of regime from one administration to the next. One administration may buy into the plan of a particular leader and government, but then it requires time for that vision to come to fruition if it's a solid one. But in that time, the people may go through a difficulty because a transition requires a downtime before it goes up, right? There is a period in which you plant the seed, you still have to wait, right? And the question, and if it's the first time you're planting those seeds and trying it in that field, you still need to wait to see whether or not it's going to yield fruit. And there needs to be an overall strategy around recognition of this transition and the potential that it may not yield the fruit immediately. Therefore, the people need to also be on board with the vision and be united in order for it to work. But when people not find food to eat, right, and the politician is saying, listen, we have to do this, we have to transition. This transition period is painful but necessary for us to move into our own economic vision. Then the people say, well, we want another government, and another person will come on the scene, probably planted there by some Western intelligentsia individual funded by some external forces, and say, vote me and I will give you a better life. I will. And of course, the sweet talking oftentimes work. It doesn't come with a lot of meat, or substance behind it, but it works because people are desperate. They want progress and they want somebody to tell them sweet words. So even though instant gratification, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we found in Africa when we were there. If you tell an African, this is what I found my own self, that you will give them £10 today or £100 in 7 days, they will take the £10 today. Likelihood that they will take the £10.
They want it no.
They want it now, right? So there is this lack of unity, right? Especially around vision, and that is why the Pan-Africanist ideology and philosophy is really the framework that must be used, to unite the people. But coming out of that needs to be the meat, more meat on the bone concerning the socioeconomics in the long term, and how that it will be achieved, including manufacturing and all the rest of it. But of course, it has to there has to be assistance with the transition. If you see what I mean, it becomes challenging to implement all of these things without creating an entire plan, a timeline. You calculate the funds and you calculate how you're going to get the funds and how the funds will be paid for, making sure that each project is on point and meeting their deadlines and all of that, because everything is really a project with finite capital, finite resources, yet you need to get from point A to point B. You see what I mean? So the practical part of it is difficult. And so politicians oftentimes don't have that level of strategic thinking. That is why they need to have the right advisors around them.
True. One thing I've noticed as well with people is that everyone wants the change. Everyone wants to see a united Africa. Everyone wants to see a developed Africa, but the work
Are you sure
that
about
is
that, Dada?
required. If you talk to 100 people,
It's target
The
Africans.
vast
It's target
majority of
Africans
them,
there.
African people, yeah.
African people, yeah.
Yeah, the vast majority of them want it. They say they want it verbally. But when it comes to the work, because as Clifton has identified, is that there are a lot of challenges towards the accomplishment of this. And that is where most people get lost because they are not willing to face the challenges required for the manifestation of this ideology or this idea. You know,
Sure.
Bingy, you've been very quiet, you know.
Very.
I'm listening because is a lot if you really listen to what our brethren saying, right? And the challenges
Yes,
that
sir.
Africa still faces even today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like you know, it seems gloomy, right? The outlook look always seems gloomy, right? For example, there's some statistics earlier on about 600 plus million people in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, who are living in poverty or who don't even have access to energy. And that was back in 2018, I believe, right? That number hasn't really changed from then till now. So the progress itself is so minuscule in some areas, right? But I think we have to approach it from a grassroots level, right? By example. That's the only way we're gonna have to do it by example to make some of these governments or entities see how it actually works, right? Which might mean we have to figure out how to fund projects, right? Like fund projects on a grassroots level too, microgrids. Africa's solution is microgrids, period, right? You build all these microgrids, but you need funding. And I know it's a challenge, but how do we really get there, right? 12 years ago, I worked for a company that did a project in Senegal, solar streetlight project, right? It was a demo project to see how it work out, blah, blah, blah. Of course, there's politics in that. Of course, now they award a contract to a French company to do 67,000 streetlights in Senegal. But I think for Africa, for us, if we want to see anything happen, it has to be it has to grow communally. That's the only way because we have too many outside influencers and the governments always go that way, right? Because they're looking at their positions too, right? They're also looking at their security, right? So even today, when we see the shift from France or the West to Russia, it's also a security issue, right? But for the development itself, I think we have to start on small scales. That's what we have to do. We have to start developing pockets so they could actually see what it's going to do. It's by example then. Because there are a lot of restrictions. Because if we listen to Brother Clifton and what he's saying, the challenges are dire. But it gives Africa this bleak outlook of they having control of their own destination all the time. So I think the way to mitigate that on a international scale is developments within your own country on small micro scales. That's the way I see it, because the challenges are endless, and the governments are always going to be working for some foreign entity or being influenced by some foreign entity. For example, Brother Clifton went down to Congo to do a project. Think about it, right? So you need funding to do this project. But how hard is it to even get people to understand what you're doing? So it has to be probably on smaller scales where it can be achieved.
Sure.
When you talk about funding as well, right? Like a lot of times the approach is, oh, we want people to give us millions of dollars. We want
Right.
people to give us, it's such a large scale. And I believe that, like, let's use these numbers as well, right? Let's say the project is costing, Brother Clifton, if it's not too much information to discuss, right? Let's talk about specifically the project you were discussing, right? In terms of, so bring it to fruition, what approximate value are we looking at in terms of, say, let's say in US dollars?
Okay. That pilot project, would be, I'd say, about $50,000.
About 50,000 US
Yeah,
dollars,
small
right?
scale. Yeah,
Okay, 50,000 US dollars.
Yeah,
And
this is, yeah.
the this is the same place that we're talking about where we said there's 900 and odd million people and 600 and odd million of them are without electricity, correct? Or
Yeah.
was that in
No, he was
Burkina
talking
Faso?
about sub-Saharan
In
Africa
Botswana, this
and
is just
Congo.
Botswana. Small
This was in
university.
Botswana, right? This
Just-
was in
just-
Botswana.
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, it is more. It would be to be honest, 50,000 is on the low end.
I know,
Yeah,
I
that's a,
understand. I
that's a
understand.
low-end
Yeah.
I
projection.
understand. I understand. So I'm saying this is in Botswana, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So we're gonna ask our geographical analyst now, brother Okavango, what's the population of Botswana, brother
I
Okavango?
don't remember the exact population of Botswana right now.
But roughly, because we know
Roughly?
you have a get
Roughly, Botswana have between 20 and 30 million people. I can't remember
between
exact.
20 and 30
Yeah,
million
man.
people, correct?
Yeah.
Nah,
What about
it don't have that much people
So-
in Botswana. Remember, you're in Botswana,
I
you're
think
not
it's
South
about. I think it's
Africa.
about 2
It's
million,
like
to be
2
honest.
point something million, right?
So Botswana?
2 point something million?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a big country, but the
It's a
population's
big,
small.
Yeah,
it's
the
a big country.
population small.
Yeah, but the
It's a
population's small.
small
They're
country
based
in
around
South
Gaborone, the
Africa, but it's
capital,
a
most of them.
small country. Population-wise.
2.6 million, right?
How much?
Okay, yeah.
2.6 million.
That's
Yeah,
a
me think
small,
I'm
small
more people understand it,
population.
you know.
Mm.
Because
Yeah,
I see,
nah.
it's a big country.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
big, but a
small. The
small population.
population small.
All right, and it's what? One Botswana pula equals 0.077 US dollars.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's an exorbitant thing, but nonetheless,
right.
let us see.
But think about the
So
the scale of economy they are talking about, right? $50,000, right? US, right?
right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
when we put it in perspective, it's not a lot of money. It's not, but people have to have the same vision as you have to make it possible.
Right.
You know, even on that level, that's a real small project, right? It's not a big,
Right.
it's not a
But
big
we're
amount of
starting
money.
small.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Even on that level, think about it, how difficult
Mhm.
it becomes to do the project.
Okay, so I just did the calculation, right?
Mhm.
50,000 US dollars into Botswana and Pula, because that's their currency, right?
Yeah.
Brother
Yeah, that's
Clifton Pula, right?
Yeah.
Is 653,536 Botswana Pula,
Mhm.
right? A population of 2 million, right? If we get $1, one
Right.
Pula
Right.
from each person, right? Remember, we don't need everybody to give it to them. 600,000. So sometimes when we're trying to access funds, we look at it from this framework, from the
Yeah.
structure of, let's get it from these places which do the
Parallel
funding.
sourcing.
Right. So what I'm saying is, if for one pooler, and I would imagine that they look at one pooler as how in Jamaica we look at $1.
Same way.
Right?
Yeah,
Right,
dollar is
Brother
a dollar.
Clifton?
Same way.
Pula is a
That's
pula.
What, Brother Clifton?
It's similar to the Jamaican, in terms
Right.
of
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I would say that the way they look at one pooler, I would say they would look at like how they look at one Jamaican dollar, right?
Yeah.
So for the average person in Botswana to provide one pooler is a doable task, right? Is a
Yeah.
doable task. So sometimes when we are trying to do these things, instead of looking outside, sometimes we just look to ourselves and do it. Yes, it's gonna be a bit more tedious to get it from the locals, from the people, because you have to put in no legwork to access these people. But what I'm saying is, instead of us sitting now and say, okay, if we don't get all of this from this source or that source, then it stops in its tracks. Sometimes we have to look at other ways of sourcing these funds and internal ways too of sourcing these funds to make these things happen.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. So that's why we have
I've
to
a,
do it on
I've a
small scale.
question.
Already
My
turned with tax law, so what do you want them to pay?
right.
Well,
I have a question.
I'll probably have a question.
Yeah. Bingy mentioned foreign interference. I want Brother Clifton to speak on foreign interference in Africa a bit, because from the outlook it seems like some of these issues is
Mhm.
related to foreign interference, outside influence. Could you tell
All
us
of it.
what percentage are the amount you think these issues are connected to foreign interference?
I think a large percentage is due to foreign interference. So if we go back to the Berlin Convention, around 1890, I can't remember exactly when it was held, 1880s. The Europeans sat in Berlin and they divided up Africa.
Yeah.
They made a lot of them French around the central and west. They made a few of them English, both in the south, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, and of course Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and of course you look around the Francophone, the so-called Francophone, and of course the Sahel, which is in like the northern part of Africa, just at the top of sub-Saharan Africa. You have Mali. Of course, there is Burkina Faso. You have, of course, all the way down to Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal. The Central African Republic, Congo, both Brazzaville and Kinshasa. All of of course, in North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco,
Algeria.
and Algeria.
Mhm.
All of those countries speak French.
Mhm.
And interesting enough, the most of those countries let's talk about the 14 sub-Saharan African countries controlled by France and Belgium, where the Minister of Finance sits on the board of the CFA franc. The CFA franc is created in France, and all the budgets of those African countries must be signed off by the Minister of Finance in France. So to this day, they've tied the CFA franc to the euro, and that is how they literally steal the wealth of the country and keep them poor. This tying, because you need to have your own currency that you can create yourself, you can back it yourself, and you can determine the interest rates on it and determine how much you can create or print, so to speak. The rate of inflation, you try to control the rate of inflation, you try to control the interest rates, because those are the leverages that you have on a currency. African countries do not have this control over their currency because it's controlled out of France. If you look at South Africa, for example, the leading industrial power in Africa, the rand is controlled by the Standard Bank, and Standard Bank is still controlled out of London, effectively, right? So if you go to Angola with Portuguese, or Mozambique, also Portuguese, guess who they do trade with? Guess who controls their currency out of Portugal? So even though Africa has been said to have independence or given independence, whatever it is, due to the monetary system and the macroeconomics, they are highly dependent on, and by default controlled by, these European countries, right? And so if you are to be sovereign, you need to control your own finances, you need to control your own land. In other words, if I'm independent, I control my body, I control my property, and of which part of that is my finance. If you don't control your body, you don't control your property, then you're not free, and therefore you cannot express sovereignty. And so sovereignty is first and foremost needs to be attained via the controlling of their currency, which we don't have in Africa. It doesn't exist in Africa. As a matter of fact, it doesn't really exist anywhere in the world. But because most of the central banks are controlled primarily by private institutions, and some of them you don't even know who is behind them. For example, Vanguard. We don't know who is behind Vanguard. You know, some of the people behind BlackRock. You can see just a little.
Yep.
You can't see all. You know, on State Street, all of these huge banks, they literally control like all the central banks of the world. But you know, of course, it is a more of a bigger problem in Africa because Africa is poor. It needs central finance. It needs all of those in order.
Brother Clifton, I have to stop you there. How do you come to that conclusion that Africa is poor? It's got
Not
all
in the
the
sense of
raw materials and most of the resources that people need to develop the technology and develop their industry.
let me restate that. I understand. Africa is not poor, right? But their current socioeconomic state, they're living in poverty. And of course, you know, resources are the real wealth, but the resources under their feet, they're not able to live off of that wealth. If you see what I mean?
Because resources are controlled by these external forces that we're talking.
And let me give you an example. For example, I have a friend of mine who knows former head of Total Congo. Total Congo had identified a place in a particular village where there is significant oil reserve. This individual recognized that if they allow mining rights in that particular area, it would then have a significant effect on the people in that area. Therefore, him being a part of that tribe, that location, did not support it. His second in command, they said, went to the powers that be and said, listen, this guy is not supporting your agenda, and therefore put me in charge. And guess what happened? This guy was kicked out and was replaced, and therefore the contract was given and mining rights for this particular area because it was not an area that he himself, as a Congolese, his people from exactly connected to. So these are black people you're talking about, you know,
undermining each other
because you have the house Negro and you have the field Negro, right? This situation exists significantly throughout Africa, where there are people, Africans, who are selling out their brothers and sisters on the ground in Africa. So we need Africans to unite, importantly, and to stop to be accomplice in the exploitation of their land, of Africa. This is a big problem, my brothers. All right, and it is a problem that demonstrates to us that Africa is not monolithic. There is the human element where some people they're like crab in a barrel mentality, right? And therefore, I believe that if you are to create an African country that is going to do well in this environment, that African country would need to be the most united African country around a particular philosophy and idea that will back its government, right, to fulfill the mandate. Right?
I'm happy that you brought that part as well, Brother Clifton, where you say around a particular philosophy and idea. Because a lot of times when we speak of African unity, we see it as this wide scale. Oh, all of us have to come together and all of us have to do this. But what we're saying is that there are certain ideas, certain philosophies, certain projects that when these things come about, we have to put aside our personal differences and look towards the greater good, the collective greater good. And that is the unity we're talking about. We're not talking about this idealistic fairy tale unity of everybody saying one and another. That is unreal.
Indeed, we've seen the Europeans, they've always been fighting among themselves. But one thing they unite on is pillaging Africa and taking the resources in developing their countries. So those are arch enemies that have united on something. So why is it that us as African cannot unite? It is behind me. I'm behind most people, but I don't understand why these things happen. And if a government is not working for the people need to get rid of that government, like we've seen in the Sahel region.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
you
but
wouldn't need
you see, this, what you're saying that Europe is not really as united as we think.
as
You
a
know,
thing.
don't forget that there are two
That's what
world
I'm
wars.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. So you know, you have the other two world wars, and if you go to Europe right now, I can tell you immediately
Absolutely.
they had this European Union agenda. This is the idea was created, right? They birthed it. Okay, we're going to unite Europe, and then next thing you know, there's a single market. They create a single market,
Mm-hmm.
and as soon as there was a common market, then they created from the common market the single market. So they talk about tariffs and trade and all the rest of it. They create all of these kind of trade routes. Once they created the trade routes, they document it in a Treaty of Rome and Maastricht, and then it moved to the Paris Agreement. And there's further and further integration of Europe systematically through these treaties, right? Until you get the European Union now, that is a political, economic union. So if you look on the trajectory or the timeline of integration of Europe, it was over a long period of time with a significant amount of negotiations. And not just that, there were a lot of pushbacks from certain patriots, you call them patriot or nationalists, who wanted not to be a part of this because they were then allowing powers in Brussels to rule over national government. And Brussels then would be a supranational entity. And of course, you don't control it. It has a mind of its own. And therefore, what if this supranational entity goes against the national interest of the people on the ground? This is what Brexit meant. Brexit saw the overt, control or power of Brussels. Didn't like it. The people didn't like it that they could change, because there are parts and elements of the single market or the European Union that is completely undemocratic, right? For example, the European Commission. The European Commission are the bureaucrats. They've been around. They're handpicked. And whatever the bureaucrats say, they write the policy. It goes to
Why that
the
episode and the trade the supersedes the land? A certain
exactly.
country that wanted Brexit, they wanted to violate this. And that was their main
Yes,
goal.
yes, exactly. So if effectively, if they can allow for a supranational entity, and the people get used to the supranational entity, that supranational entity would have so much power that directing the course of the world becomes easier. You don't have to deal with individual states. You just push buttons in the supranational entity, and all of the Union will change. And that's why they're trying to make a Europe monolithic or homogeneous in terms of white, white, white. But there's a lot of different philosophy, different points of view, different ideology, different history, different everything that comes when it comes to negotiating, for example, about agriculture. The French are always against the Germans, the French against the British because they're fighting and they're haggling for who gets to export what at what percentage
But
to the market.
they unite against Africa.
Right.
Yeah,
And I believe that is the point that's being made, Brother Clifton, in that
No matter what.
all these issues that you're talking about exist. They are valid, they're real issues. They're issues that cause division between these nations, right? But when it comes to the specific idea or the specific cause, they can put those
Right.
divisive points aside, and they're able to work in solidarity towards the accomplishment of this goal. And that is the point that I believe Brother Yaga is making, where he's saying that, listen, if these people with all these generations of issues can put those things aside and work together for a common goal, then as African people, we have to get to that mindset where we can put because some of the issues that we have are not as long standing as those. You understand? A lot of them are. So we can put those issues aside and work together for a common goal.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, one of the things I want to say is very, very important. The people on the ground and the people that make power are very different people,
Different.
right? So
We agree with that.
because, for example, the government or the big powers did not want Brexit because they are tied to this idea of a ever greater, grander Europe, right? They've bought into the idea wherever it's coming from. For example, the Iraq War, 80% of the people didn't want invasion of Iraq. They were demonstrating against the war. But guess what? The power leader, George Bush, went against the people. So the people in power don't really represent the will of the people. There is an elite within these European countries that are connected to the banking cartel, right? And of course these banking cartels, they're the ones who go there and use the financial markets to manipulate what they want to manipulate and take what they want to take. That allows for the politicians and the guys negotiating contracts to go in now with the backing of those individuals, the moneyed class of people, elite, to then go and set the negotiation terms completely in their favor. But in terms of the uniting in Africa, that unity came from the Berlin Convention, when they said, okay, the French, you are that, you have this. Belgium, you have that. England, Dutch, you have that. Portuguese, you have that. And so Italy didn't have any, and so Italy tried to go into the motherland and get whooped.
Lots of scramble.
Right. So you know, in that respect, they are still at war against your people. There's a war. There is different type of war. You have wars top down and wars vertical, right? Within each of the countries, even the so-called elite of these countries, they are not a monolith in that sense, right? So you can easily recognize by when you analyze the history. For example, the French were at the Spanish and the English in the Caribbean when they were looking to huggle what state was belonged to them. Of course, the French and the Spanish agreed on Hispaniola, but that did not come through. They came through conflict and they came to an agreement. Or the Spanish invasion, I believe, of a few of the I can't remember all of the history there, but you know what I'm talking about.
We know exactly what's going
It's not a monolith. It's not a monolith. There is on top of the governments, there is a power broker there. This power broker, they are literally a cult, right? I don't know how much details you guys want me to get into about these things, because people think it's conspiracy.
Like coffee.
I think
Deep dive. There's a deep dive.
I think what we may have to do, Brother Clifton, is we may have to have a second
Part two.
hearing
Yeah, we definitely a
to
second.
deal with
Time is against
those
us.
aspects of it, because think we kind of had a good oversight, and we really haven't touched on like so much on the renewable resources or energy,
Yeah.
which is one of the parts that we wanted to touch on as well.
But
But what we're
Dada,
gonna have to do, yes, sir.
I know you're about to wrap up, but I have one question, just a short one, right? Before you do.
You have to say
Can you
pretty before you do that.
pray? Brother
I know
Clifton.
this, yeah, I gotta have it down pat.
Yeah. Brother Clifton, can you name an African country or African country that is have the blueprint or is showing signs of breaking these chains of, you know what I mean, and moving towards, you know what I mean, economic growth, or, you know what I mean, and doing the right thing? Is there any country at the blueprint that can say, okay, look at that country, they are moving in the right direction?
Ibrahim Traore of Burkina
Oh,
Faso.
I'm glad you
Back
said that.
in
Yeah,
Faso.
okay.
Comes
I
to mind
agree.
with
I
him. Yeah.
agree. Yes, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is controversial, if I say this to in some circles, I mean,
Oh,
problems.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, but we have to be controversial. We have to be honest about
Yes,
it.
man.
And I mean, he is an anomaly, because he is
A
young.
good anomaly.
Yeah, a good
And
anomaly.
he's
Good
young
anomaly.
too. He got youth.
He's young. He's principled. I'm saying he's intelligent. He understands philosophy, psychology. He's well rounded and military strategy. You know what I mean? So he's in a very, very unique position, right? Because if it were any ordinary person, he would have been assassinated already.
Mhm.
You see
Yeah.
what I mean?
And they have tried. They have
And
tried.
they've tried, and they will
Multiple
continue to try.
times. Multiple
Absolutely.
times. Multiple
Yeah, man.
times.
But yeah, man.
Yeah.
Burkina Faso.
Very, very, very interesting discussion. Do remember to like, share, and subscribe. Do remember to follow each Strand Class episode, because each time proves to be more interesting and of unearthing more important issues and points that we need to discuss and need to be aware of. Thank you, Brother Clifton. Very, very, very informative
Yes, give
discussion.
thanks,
Yeah, man.
brother.
It's a
Big
great,
thanks to the
it's a
members of the
great
Strand
short class,
Class.
you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
Brother Bingi, Brother Yaga, aka Teacher Ma'at, Okavango, the Rebel Guru.
Give
I am
thanks.
yours
Blessings.
truly, Ras Dada, and do give thanks. I.
Yeah, man. Wealth of knowledge and expertise.